Hey everybody, Tim Ulbrich here, and welcome to this week's episode of the RX Money Roundup segment on the YFP podcast, where we give you our take on relevant financial news and updates, answer your questions, and break down examples of financial planning in action. Today, I'm talking about what I do and don't like about the 7 baby steps prescribed by Dave Ramsey. But before I do that, let me give a shout out to our financial planning and tax professionals at YFP that make this segment possible. At YFP, we support pharmacists at every stage of their careers to take control of their finances, reach their financial goals, and build wealth through comprehensive fee-only financial planning and tax planning. You can learn more and book a free discovery call by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Okay, this week I'm talking through what I do and don't like about the Dave Ramsey 7 baby steps. And if you're not already familiar with those 7 baby steps, hang tight. I'll walk through those in just a few moments. And while I'm not an avid follower today of Dave Ramsey's principles and baby steps, I have to give credit where credit is due. Reading his book, The Total Money Makeover, going through Financial Peace University, and listening to his podcast was a wake-up call over a decade ago that inspired the journey for Jess and I to pay off a couple $100,000 of student loan debt and really led to the path and journey that we're on today. That book and listening to his podcast lit a fire under us to learn more, to create our own path and plan, even if that didn't follow the path and plan that he prescribes to so many. The Ramsey 7 baby steps, we'll link to a resource in the show notes if you want to learn more, were really the grounding and framework that we needed at the time to get started and to build momentum in getting out of debt, building our emergency savings, and having a prioritized approach to achieving our goals. So real quick, what are the 7 baby steps? Well, in this order, step 1 is save $1,000 for your starter emergency fund. The idea here is with each one of these, when you check the box, you move on to the next one. Step 2 is pay off all debt except the house using the debt snowball method. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Step 3 is save 3 to 6 months of expenses in a fully funded emergency fund. Step 4 is invest 15% of your household income in retirement. Step 5 is save for your children's college fund. Step 6 is pay off your home early. And step 7 is build wealth and give. So again, step 1, $1,000, start an emergency fund. Step 2, pay off all debt except the house using the debt snowball. Step 3, 3 to 6 months emergency fund. Step 4, investing 15% of household income. Step 5, saving for kids' college. Step 6, paying off the house early. Step 7, build wealth and give. So here's what I do like about the 7 baby steps. I like the simplicity of the framework, especially for those that are feeling overwhelmed, confused, frustrated, or anxious. It can provide a necessary grounding point to get started or to get back on track. When you look at the 7 baby steps, it's all about momentum. It's about that feeling of progressing from one step to another. And that feeling of momentum cannot be underestimated, whether it's this framework or another framework, especially for those that are trying to get back on track. What I also like is that for 2 individuals, partners, spouses, significant others that are working to get on the same page financially, this framework, or any framework for a matter, can act as a third party. Now, caveat here, I think this framework, because of the focus around debt repayment, if you have individuals that have 2 very different money philosophies, it could also be quite controversial, right? So that may or may not be helpful. I like that step 1, save $1,000 for an emergency fund. I like that as a priority, no matter what else is going on, right? We view at YFP, we view that the emergency fund and eliminating any high interest rate revolving credit card debt is really the 2 things that we consider to be baby stepping into the financial plan, right? Because we've got to build a base and we've got to stop the bleeding with the high interest rate revolving credit card debt. So I like that concept. Now, you'll hear what I don't like in a moment is that I'm not necessarily on the same page of all debt except the house being eliminated in step 2 before we do other things. So hold that thought. We'll come back in a moment. I also like that it puts college savings in the right priority. This is something I see among a lot of pharmacists, probably true of any individual coming out with a lot of student loan debt, is that they don't want their child to experience the same thing that they experience. So that might lead to people saving for kids' college out of priority, whether that be the emergency fund, whether that be your own retirement planning and investing. So I like how it put college savings in the right priority. I also like that as a giving and philanthropy component. We've talked about this before on the podcast. Most recently, we had Joe Baker on the show to talk about his leaving and living a legacy through his philanthropic activity and giving. And I like that It has giving as a front and center part of the financial plan. And last but not least, I like that it's a system that works, right? There's many options of systems. This is certainly one, but I feel like it could be optimized a little bit further. So let's transition there and talk about what I don't like and where I think it falls short. So, what I don't like about the baby steps is while the snowball method has a valuable role in feeling like you're making progress and momentum, right? The whole idea of the snowball method is you pay off your debts regardless of interest rate. You pay them off in balance of smallest to largest. Once you knock out the smallest, you roll that payment into the next one, right? All about momentum. And while that's true, it's not the most efficient way to pay off debt, right? When you think about something like the avalanche method, we're more focused on the higher interest rate on the debt rather than the amount of the debt that we're paying off. I don't like that steps 1 through 3 of the baby steps ignore an employer retirement match. I think we can take the match and potentially do some other investing while working through steps number 2 and 3. Right? When you look at baby step number 2, pay off all debt except the house using the debt snowball. I think about a typical pharmacist. We might have student loan debt. We might have some credit card debt. We might have a car debt that we're paying off, right? And I think we have to look at each one of those individually. And if you've got a couple $100,000 student loan debt, that might take time. And we can't wait for most individuals that time period to be focused on other goals like investing that are represented in step 4 or like saving up for the fully funded amount in the emergency fund in step number 3. So I think we have to look at that on a little bit more of a granular basis. Now, that leads to my next point, which is that my big knock on the Ramsey baby steps is that it lacks specificity, right? So much of the financial plan, we talk about this on the show all the time, is it depends because everyone's situation is different. Now, to be fair, when you're developing any framework like the 7 baby steps, that will be true, right? It will lack specificity because it's a framework, it's a guide, it's not an individual financial plan, especially when I think about the Ramsey podcast and platform that's broadcasting to millions of people each and every day and trying to get people on the same page with a general language and construct. So, for example, when it comes to the emergency fund, is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it somewhere in between? It depends, right? We talked about how not all types of debt are created equal. Not everyone's feelings and philosophies towards the debt are equal. We've got to factor that in. We got to look at the interest rates. We got to look at the emotional component there. We have to look at your individual goals. Everyone's goals are different. Do we have a delayed start towards saving for retirement? That's relevant, right? We may not want to wait till step 4. Are there other situations and reasons that we might need to prioritize one of these above the others? Is 15% enough? It depends, right? It depends on your situation. So if we look at baby step number 4, saving 50% of your household, 15% of your household income towards retirement, is it enough? Depends on when you're starting, depends on what your retirement planning situation looks like. The other thing I think about is what about early retirement? So if someone's thinking that early retirement is a priority, then we have to not only look at the priority of investing a little bit differently, but in which buckets are we investing? Pre-tax, post-tax, brokerage types of accounts, other types of accounts. All of that level of detail and specificity is missing here. Now, the other thing that I would note here is while it's later in the 7 steps, right? Paying off the home early is baby step number 6. That may or may not make sense, right? In terms of the interest rate, in terms of the emotional component, in terms of the timeline when somebody's retiring, when they're working, what are the other sources of income? Again, the specificity piece here is lacking. If someone has an interest rate at 6.5%, 7% versus 3%, if they want to have that home paid off because it's a big emotional goal before they get into retirement with a fixed income, all of these things may prioritize whether or not we're going to pay off the home early. So to summarize, I have a lot of respect for this framework and other frameworks as I think it gives a lot of people some areas in which they can wrap their arms around, get momentum, and begin to build a construct for the financial plan. But at the end of the day, I think there are some things that are missing here that aren't optimized and certainly aren't customized to the individual when it comes to how we're going to develop the financial plan. Thank you so much for listening to this week's segment of the RX Money Roundup podcast. If you have a topic that you would like for us to feature or a question, head on over to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask, or you can also send us an email at info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. An important reminder as we wrap up the episode that the content in this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial product. For more information on this, you can visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks so much for listening, for your support of the podcast. Have a great rest of your week.